A millionaire CEO showed up to fire his worker. But what he saw inside her humble house shocked him. Before we begin the story, leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from. And subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our latest stories. Enjoy the story. Richard Langston wasn't the kind of man who second-guessed himself. As CEO of Langston Holdings, one of Chicago's most ruthless real estate firms, he built his empire on efficiency, precision, and the unshakable belief that emotions had no place in business. Employees who underperformed were dismissed. Properties that underdelivered were sold. And excuses, well, they were simply unacceptable. So when his executive assistant slid a thin manila folder across his desk with a post-it that read, "Emma Callahan, Urgent HR Review," he didn't hesitate. Emma Callahan had been on the company's radar for months. Lateness, missed KPIs, unexplained absences. Despite multiple warnings, her performance hadn't improved. The HR team suggested termination. Richard signed off without reading more than the summary page. But just as he was placing the folder aside, a photograph slipped out. A blurry security image of her clocking in late, one hand clutching a child's backpack, her face drawn and exhausted. He stared at it longer than he meant to. Something about her expression gnawed at him, fatigue mixed with desperation. Against all precedent, Richard decided to handle it personally. Maybe he was curious. Maybe he wanted to remind his team that no one was above accountability. Maybe, deep down, something he wasn't ready to admit pulled at him. Whatever the reason, 2 hours later, he was in the back seat of his car, en route to a neighborhood his firm usually bought and bulldozed, not visited. The apartment complex was weathered and tired. Paint peeled from the stucco walls, and the smell of damp concrete lingered in the air. Children's chalk drawings decorated the cracked sidewalk. Richard adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit and took a long breath before climbing the narrow stairwell to apartment 3B. He rehearsed his lines. Calm, detached, firm. This would be swift. He knocked. When the door opened, the first thing he noticed wasn't Emma. It was the silence behind her. The kind of silence that comes not from peace, but from exhaustion. Her eyes widened when she saw him, confusion quickly hardening into wariness. "Mr. Langston?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk," he said. "May I come in?" She stepped aside reluctantly. The inside was even smaller than he'd imagined. Sparse furniture, walls decorated with crayon drawings, a threadbare rug covered scuffed hardwood. A toy rabbit lay on the couch, missing one eye. "Sorry about the mess," Emma said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I wasn't expecting this." Richard remained silent, his gaze scanning the room until it landed on two small figures huddled on the floor near the kitchen. Two little girls, no older than 6. One was braiding the other's hair with clumsy, loving fingers. They didn't notice him at first, too wrapped in their game. And then the one doing the braiding looked up, and time stopped. He knew those eyes. Those were Evan's eyes. He stumbled back half a step. Emma froze, then followed his line of sight and stepped protectively in front of the girls. "This isn't a good time," she said, her voice suddenly steel. But Richard couldn't look away. "Who are they?" he asked, though a terrible answer was already forming in his chest. Emma's mouth tightened. "They're my daughters, Lily and June." His vision tunneled, his breath caught in his throat. He looked again, really looked, and saw it. The shape of their mouths, the tilt of their chins, identical to the boy he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. "My son?" he managed to ask, the words dry and broken. "Evan," she said, "your son, my husband. He died 3 years ago. You wouldn't know that, though. You cut him out long before that." The room pulsed. The girls were watching now, their small faces curious, unsure. Richard swallowed. The words came out like gravel. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Emma laughed, sharp, humorless. "Tell you. He tried. Letters, emails. You never answered. And when we needed you most, when the girls were born, he said you'd never come." He looked at the girls again. They were still, watching. One of them tilted her head. "Are you my grandpa?" she asked. Something cracked. And in that moment, the powerful, untouchable Richard Langston, who had never missed a quarterly target, who never showed weakness in a boardroom, was paralyzed. The air in the room had changed. The script he came with was gone. There would be no firing today. No speeches about accountability or professionalism. Just a man and the family he didn't know he had. If this moment caught you by surprise, imagine how the rest of this story unfolds. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss what happens next. This is only the beginning of a powerful journey about second chances, forgiveness, and what it truly means to show up for the people who matter. What do you think Richard should do next? A. Walk away and stay out of their lives. B. Offer financial help only. C. Try to be part of their lives and rebuild what was lost. Let us know your answer in the comments below. Richard Langston stood frozen in the cramped living room, his sharp mind momentarily dulled by the sight of the two little girls. The question from one of them, "Are you my grandpa?" still echoed in his ears, louder than the ticking of the kitchen clock or the distant hum of traffic from the street outside. He had come to end a contract. Instead, he had stumbled into a piece of his past he didn't know existed. Emma didn't speak. She simply watched him, arms crossed, waiting to see what he would do now that his armor had cracked. The girls continued staring too, one peeking from behind her sister, the other still curious and expectant. There was no recognition in their eyes, only innocence. Richard took a slow breath. "I didn't know," he said, the words falling out like loose gravel. Emma didn't move. "You didn't want to know." That stopped him. She wasn't wrong. He'd severed ties with Evan so cleanly, so absolutely, that even the idea of reconciliation had never been allowed to germinate. When his son had chosen a guitar over a boardroom, Richard had chosen pride over patience. That pride had cost him his son, and now, he realized, it had nearly cost him something even greater. The silence in the room thickened, broken only when the smaller girl stepped forward and held up a handmade drawing. Crayons scribbled a smiling sun, a woman with long brown hair, two small girls with pigtails, and a figure holding a guitar. "This is our family," she said. "That's Daddy." Richard blinked, stunned by how easily the past bled into the present. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "June," she said proudly. "And that's Lily. We're twins. I'm older, by 4 minutes." Emma cleared her throat, and her voice returned with quiet firmness. "Girls, why don't you go finish your game in the bedroom? I need to speak with Mr. Langston." To Richard's surprise, they obeyed without protest, skipping down the hallway with the kind of resilience only children in struggle seem to possess. Once they were gone, Emma turned back to him, her eyes sharp. I don't know what you want, Mr. Langston, but I'm not going to let you walk in here like a savior when you've been a ghost for their entire lives. I didn't come here for this, he admitted. I came to terminate your employment. I know, but I didn't know who you were, or who they were. Emma took a step closer, her voice trembling with fatigue and fury. They've been eating cereal with water because I'm behind on bills. I've patched their shoes with glue. And you, sitting in that high-rise, holding the keys to everything they'll never have. What do you want to do now? Throw money at it? Richard flinched. It would be easier if that were the solution. If a check could erase all of it, the cold years, the bitter silence, the grief. But as he looked around the room, at the battered bookshelf, the peeling wallpaper, the photos taped to the fridge, it became clear that this wasn't about money. Not really. I want to understand, he said finally. What happened? Why Evan never told me? Why I never knew them? Emma's jaw clenched. Because you made sure Evan believed he didn't matter to you. You called his music a waste of time. You cut him off when he didn't follow your path. He was scared to come to you. Even when he got sick, he said, he won't care. And when he died, he still believed that. The words hit like stone. Richard looked down at his hands, the same hands that had signed contracts, shaken hands with governors, raised a son once, poorly. And you? Why didn't you reach out? Because I was too busy surviving. And because I didn't want to beg a man who broke his own son to care about his granddaughters. Richard nodded slowly. There was nothing he could say to undo it, no argument to counter grief. He could only absorb the truth, painful as it was. I'd like to help now, he said, not with money, with time, with presence. Emma hesitated. They don't know you, but they could, he offered. A long pause passed between them. Finally, Emma sighed. I'm not making any promises. They've had enough broken ones already. I understand. Come back next week, she said quietly. Same time, if you're serious. Richard gave a single nod and walked to the door. As he opened it, he glanced back at the hallway where the girls had disappeared. A place he never meant to enter had become a door he couldn't close. He had arrived to sever a tie and left feeling the frayed end of something that still had a chance to be mended. He wasn't sure what came next. But for the first time in years, Richard Langston knew where he needed to be. And it wasn't in a boardroom. Not this time. Not anymore. The ride back to the Langston Tower was silent. Richard sat in the back seat of his sleek black car, staring blankly out the window, the city flashing by in streaks of glass and steel. But he didn't see it. All he could see were the faces of two little girls, their wide eyes staring at him with a kind of innocent curiosity that shattered something he didn't even realize had hardened inside him. His driver asked twice if he was okay. Richard didn't answer. The silence was his only language now. Back in his office, 40 floors above the city, everything was exactly as he left it. Immaculate, ordered, distant. Yet it felt foreign, cold, as though his skin no longer belonged in this place. He stood for a long time in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the people below move like ants in a rhythm that had always reassured him. But now it only reminded him how many lives he had ignored, how many people he'd passed by without a second thought. He walked over to the credenza and pulled open a drawer he hadn't touched in years. At the bottom, beneath a stack of old business cards and forgotten mementos, lay a photo of Evan. A framed candid from a company picnic 15 years ago. Evan was young then, barely out of college, with a guitar slung over his shoulder, laughing at something out of frame. Richard had kept it for reasons he never examined. Maybe guilt. Maybe some part of him had always known he would need it later, when the silence became too heavy to carry. He set the frame on his desk and sat down, staring at it. He remembered the day Evan came to him, wide-eyed and excited, announcing he wanted to leave the company and pursue music full-time. "I want to live differently," he'd said. "I want to create something real." Richard had laughed. Then he'd told him to grow up. "The world doesn't run on dreams, Evan. It runs on results." That was the last real conversation they had. The rest was years of tension, distance, and final silence. Now, Evan was gone. And Richard hadn't even gone to the funeral. When his assistant Rebecca knocked, he didn't answer. She let herself in anyway, setting down a stack of documents before catching sight of the photograph on his desk. "I haven't seen that in a long time," she said carefully. Richard didn't look up. "Did you know he had children?" Rebecca hesitated. "I knew he got married, but no, I didn't know about the girls." He nodded slowly. "No one did. I assume this means Emma Callahan is not being terminated." "No," he said, "she's not." Rebecca paused. "Should I notify HR to reverse the process? Tell them the file was closed, indefinitely." He paused, then added, "And Rebecca, any employee files currently in review for termination due to underperformance, have them flagged. I want to see each one personally." Her brows lifted slightly, but she said nothing. "Of course, Mr. Langston." After she left, Richard opened his laptop. He searched for Evan's name, something he had never done, even after the obituary came. He found old videos, grainy footage of Evan performing in small venues, cafes, school auditoriums. His son's voice filled the office, low and warm, with lyrics that spoke of searching, of leaving, of missing something unnamed. One video was different. It was homemade. Just Evan in a living room, strumming softly on the guitar. He looked older, tired, but peaceful in a way Richard didn't recognize. Halfway through, a tiny voice called, "Daddy!" And Evan looked off camera, grinning. "You want to sing with me, Lily?" A child clambered into his lap, and he adjusted the guitar. "Okay," he said. "Let's show Grandpa how we do it, just in case he ever watches." Richard stopped the video. He pressed his hands against his face, trying to block the weight pressing into his chest. His son had never stopped hoping, even when Richard had given him every reason to. That night, Richard didn't go home to his penthouse overlooking the lake. He drove to Lincoln Park, to the bench where he used to take Evan as a boy to feed ducks on Sunday mornings. He sat there in the cold spring air for over an hour, unmoving, the wind biting through his coat like pennants. He didn't know what came next. He didn't know how to be a grandfather. He hadn't even been a good father. But he knew this much now. Whatever time he had left, it would not be spent in glass towers pretending the past hadn't happened. There were two little girls with his son's eyes living in a worn-out apartment, growing up thinking the world forgot them. And he wouldn't be part of that forgetting, not anymore. The following week, Richard Langston stood once more at the edge of a sidewalk cracked with time, in front of the modest apartment building that had quietly dismantled his worldview just days earlier. His driver waited behind the wheel, uncertain whether this return visit marked a new beginning or another miscalculation. Richard didn't explain. He simply adjusted the cuff of his coat and stepped into the building alone. He was early. He hadn't called ahead. He didn't know what he would say when Emma opened the door. but he knew he needed to be there. Not for a speech, not for show, just to be present. Something he had failed to do too many times before. Emma opened the door, wearing the same guarded expression he remembered, a silent blend of strength and exhaustion. Her eyes scanned him as if to weigh whether he was here out of guilt or resolve. "You're back," she said, not asking. "I said I would be." There was a pause. Then, without a word, she stepped aside to let him in. The apartment looked the same. The scent of warmed bread mingled faintly with lavender soap, and crayon drawings still decorated the fridge. But something felt subtly different. Maybe it was him. Maybe it was the way the room seemed less like a site of confrontation and more like the fragile core of a life trying to hold itself together. Lily and June appeared from their bedroom, still in pajamas, their hair wild from sleep. June ran up immediately, beaming. "You came back!" Richard crouched instinctively, surprised at how natural the motion felt. "I said I would, didn't I?" Lily hung back, watching carefully, her hand holding a stuffed dog by the ear. "Mommy said you might come, or you might not." "Well," Richard said gently, "I didn't want to miss your tea party." Emma folded her arms, leaning against the wall, watching this new version of a man she once swore she'd never let near her daughters. The girls led Richard to the tiny plastic table in the corner, already set with mismatched cups and a chipped pink teapot. They poured invisible tea with full ceremony, asking him if he wanted sugar, milk, or cookies made of air. And for the first time in what felt like decades, Richard Langston laughed. A full, open laugh that startled even him. After the third round of imaginary tea and a brief tutorial on how to sip like a princess, Emma cleared her throat. "Girls, why don't you let Mr. Langston rest a minute?" He raised a hand. "Richard is fine." Lily blinked. "That's your name?" "Yes, but I'd be okay with Grandpa too, if you ever wanted to." June clapped, delighted. "We already told our teacher we have a grandpa now." Emma shot her daughter a quick look, but it was too late. The truth was out, and Richard saw it. Her attempt to shield them from disappointment was beginning to erode beneath the quiet hope growing in their hearts. After the girls returned to their room with a picture book, Emma turned to him, arms still crossed. "They've been asking questions all week. About you. About Evan. I told them what I could, but you don't want to give them false hope," Richard finished for her. She nodded. "They've lost enough already." "I'm not leaving," he said. "Not unless you ask me to." The words hung between them like a dare and a promise. Emma sighed and motioned toward the couch. He followed. The cushions sagged under his weight, and he noticed for the first time how worn everything truly was. The frayed edges of a throw pillow, the faint water stains on the ceiling. He had owned buildings nicer than this that he'd torn down without blinking. "They don't need a check," Emma said, as if reading his thoughts. "They need someone to show up. Someone who listens." "I'm learning," he admitted. She looked at him for a long moment. "You really didn't know, did you?" "No, I didn't even know Evan was married." Emma nodded slowly, her jaw tightening. "He didn't want you to think he married for security. That's what you would have assumed." He didn't argue. He played for them, she said quietly, every night after stories. He'd write little lullabies and strum his old guitar while they fell asleep. Said it helped them feel safe. Richard said nothing. The image pierced deeper than he expected. His son, a man he had dismissed as weak, had found strength in the very thing Richard had ridiculed: presence, vulnerability, love. He left a few recordings, Emma added. I haven't played them since he died. It was too hard, but maybe you should hear one. She walked to a drawer, pulled out an old phone, and tapped through a few files. Then, from the speaker came Evan's voice, warm, soft, unmistakable, singing to his daughters. Richard closed his eyes. It was the sound of everything he had missed. Every birthday, every bedtime, every ordinary moment stitched together into the life his son had built without him. When the song ended, Emma looked at him, her eyes less hard than before. They deserve to know him, not just what I remember. And maybe you do too. Richard couldn't speak. But in his silence, a shift occurred. Not an apology, not yet, but an understanding. One step closer to something neither of them knew how to name. He stood after a while, walked to the door, then turned. Same time next week? He asked. Emma nodded once. Bring cookies, real ones this time. He almost smiled. I'll bring the best in Chicago. And with that, he left. Not because he had to, but because he knew he'd return. This time, with purpose. Richard didn't return the next week with store-bought cookies. He returned with a bakery box wrapped in twine from a place in Lincoln Park, the kind Evan used to beg to visit as a teenager. Inside were delicate lemon bars, chocolate chip cookies still warm, and 2 iced cupcakes with pink butterflies on top. It wasn't just an offering. It was a memory rebuilt with purpose. The door opened before he knocked. June had been watching through the peephole. You're late, she said, hands on her hips. I brought a bribe, Richard replied, lifting the box. She grinned and ushered him in. Emma stood in the kitchen, her hair tied up in a loose bun, sleeves rolled to her elbows as she rinsed dishes in the sink. She glanced over her shoulder, drying her hands with a towel. You actually brought cookies. I said I would, he replied. Most people say a lot of things, she murmured, not unkindly. Lily appeared, still wearing her school uniform from earlier in the day, a paper crown perched crookedly on her head. It was hat day at school, she announced, showing it off proudly. Mine's a queen crown. I can see that, Richard said, kneeling, and a very convincing one. She smiled, pleased. They sat together around the coffee table, the girls with sticky fingers and crumb-speckled cheeks, and Emma watching from the couch, arms crossed, but softer now. There was a rhythm to the moment that Richard hadn't anticipated, a casualness, a domesticity that made him feel both deeply out of place and more at home than he had in years. After dessert, June tugged on his sleeve. Can we show you our drawings? He followed the girls to their shared room. Its 2 twin beds pressed against opposite walls and covered in mismatched quilts. Drawings were taped to nearly every surface. Rainbows, unicorns, messy stick figures labeled Mommy and Me. And now, several with a tall figure labeled Grandpa. One caught his eye. It was of a man with gray hair sitting in a tiny chair, drinking tea with 2 little girls. His tie was crooked and his smile wide. You have an artist in the family, he said. That one's Lily's, June beamed. Mine's the next one. He turned to the next page. A guitar. A man playing it under a starry sky. The words, I miss you, written in blocky crayon above it. He swallowed hard. Is that your dad? June nodded. Mom says he sang to the stars so we wouldn't be scared at night. Richard sat down on the edge of the bed, his hand resting lightly on the paper. "He did," he said softly. "He did that even when he was small. Evan used to hum when he thought no one was listening." June leaned her head against his arm. "Will you tell us about him?" It was a request so simple and yet so devastating. He nearly said no. He didn't know how to talk about Evan without choking on regret, but he nodded. "He was brave," he began, voice rough. "He stood up for what he believed in, even when it cost him." He smiled with his whole face. He wasn't afraid to laugh too loud or cry in public. He played music like he was telling secrets to the sky. June blinked up at him, listening as if it were a bedtime story. "He loved you both," he added, "more than anything." Emma watched quietly from the hallway. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the weight of his words rooted her in place. It was the first time she'd ever heard Richard speak of Evan without bitterness or defensiveness. And more than that, it was the first time he let grief slip through the cracks of his business-forged armor. Later, after the girls were asleep, Emma offered Richard a cup of tea. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound between them for a while. "They ask about him less now," she said after a pause. "It scares me, like they're forgetting." "They're not," Richard said. "They're just making room for new memories. That's what children do. They don't forget. They grow." Emma nodded. "They want you to come to Lily's class next week. It's family sharing day. They each pick someone to talk about." "And she picked me?" Richard asked, surprised. Emma half smiled. "She said you brought the best cookies." He chuckled under his breath, then sobered. "Are you okay with that?" "I don't know," she said truthfully, "but I'm trying." He looked down at his tea, then back at her. "Thank you for letting me try too." There was no handshake, no signed agreement, just the quiet consent between two people bound by love for someone they'd lost, and a hope that maybe, just maybe, something good could still grow from it. Before he left, he knelt beside the girl's room once more, glancing at the drawing of the guitar on the wall. "Good night, Evan," he whispered. And for the first time in years, it didn't feel like a goodbye. Richard Langston stood awkwardly at the back of Lily's first-grade classroom, surrounded by glittery construction paper, walls lined with alphabet posters, and a chaotic orchestra of small voices. A few parents were scattered around, chatting politely, some juggling younger siblings or balancing coffee cups. He wore his usual suit, toned down slightly by removing the tie, but still looked distinctly out of place. Children stared at him curiously, and a few whispered. He couldn't blame them. He looked more like a visiting school inspector than a doting grandfather. Lily spotted him through the crowd and lit up. She dashed across the room, crown from last week still on her head like it had never been removed. "You came," she said, tugging on his sleeve. "I said I would, didn't I?" he replied, smiling. Emma sat nearby with June, watching as Lily guided Richard to the sharing circle. He looked at her briefly and offered a silent nod of thanks. She returned it, less wary now, but still guarded. Trust, she had learned, was something built slowly. One choice, one visit, one promise kept at a time. The teacher clapped her hands for attention and welcomed everyone. Today is Family Sharing Day. Each student has chosen someone special to introduce and share something about their life. Richard listened to the first few presentations. A firefighter uncle, a grandmother who bakes the best cookies, a dad who builds birdhouses. Then it was Lily's turn. She stood, gripping a drawing in one hand, and motioned for Richard to sit beside her. "This is my grandpa," she said. "He didn't always know he was our grandpa, but now he does." The room chuckled softly, and Richard felt the heat rise in his face. "He brings cookies, and he tells stories about my daddy, who plays music in heaven now." She held up her drawing, a picture of a man with gray hair sitting on a bench next to a boy with a guitar. The teacher knelt beside her. "And what do you like most about your grandpa?" Lily thought for a moment. "He listens." Richard blinked. It wasn't the kind of answer he expected, but it was the one that mattered. Afterward, Emma approached him as the class dispersed. "You handled that better than I thought you would," she said. "I rehearsed 100 responses," he replied. "None of them were needed." "That's because she didn't want a speech. She just wanted you there." He nodded slowly, understanding now what he hadn't before. Presence didn't demand perfection. It demanded consistency. And that was something he could offer. Over the next few weeks, Richard began weaving himself into their lives, not with grand gestures, but with steady, quiet steps. He helped Emma find a part-time childcare assistant for after-school hours. He reviewed her resume and offered to personally recommend her for internal training at Langston Holdings. Not as a handout, but because she was capable. Emma, hesitant at first, agreed only after he promised to stay out of the hiring decision. "I don't want a role handed to me," she had said. "I need to earn it." "And you will," he replied. "You already have." Sometimes he picked the girls up from school when Emma had interviews. Other times they visited his office, where Rebecca, his once unshakable assistant, kept candy in her drawer just for them and pretended not to notice when June rearranged her desk pens by color. In those visits, Richard discovered a surprising thing. People weren't put off by the girl's presence. In fact, they softened. Even boardroom conversations seemed more human when preceded by a kindergartner's drawing left on the CEO's desk. He began to realize how empty his world had been. Not just the sterile office or the lonely condo, but the way he had stripped meaning from his days in pursuit of outcomes. Lily and June didn't ask about balance sheets or quarterly targets. They asked what clouds tasted like and why some music made people cry. And somehow, those questions began to feel more important. One night, after dinner at Emma's apartment, a casserole she'd insisted on cooking herself, Richard helped the girls into their pajamas while Emma washed dishes. Lily climbed into bed and reached under her pillow. "Mommy gave me this," she said, pulling out a small photo. It was faded, edges worn. Evan, younger and smiling wide, sat on the hood of a car, holding a baby guitar. "He used to sing lullabies," Lily whispered. "But Mommy says your voice is deeper. Maybe you could try sometime?" Richard felt his chest tighten. "I'm not very good at singing," June giggled. Neither was Daddy. He made up silly songs. He glanced toward Emma, who was listening from the doorway, but didn't intervene. Just watched. So, Richard cleared his throat and sang the only lullaby he could remember from Evan's childhood. His voice cracked, rough and uncertain, but the girls listened anyway, their eyes wide with sleep, their fingers curled under their cheeks. Emma's eyes glistened, but she said nothing. When he finished, Lily whispered, "That one's my favorite now." He kissed their foreheads gently and turned to leave the room. Emma met him in the hallway, arms crossed, but expression soft. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I wanted to," he replied. She studied him for a moment. You're doing better than I expected. I had a good teacher, he said. Then, after a pause, two, actually. She smiled, just faintly, and in that moment, a piece of something old fell away. Resentment, maybe, or just fear. Whatever it was, Richard knew this much. He was no longer the man who once cut his son out of his life over pride. He was becoming something else entirely. A man who stayed. A man who listened. A man learning, one bedtime song at a time, what it meant to love without condition. Richard sat at his desk in the top-floor office of Langston Holdings, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the polished wood. The city stretched beneath him, glass and steel as far as the eye could see. But these days, he found himself less interested in the skyline. Instead, he stared at the framed picture now taking up permanent residence next to his awards and leadership plaques. A crayon drawing from Lily and June. In it, he stood between them in front of a house with flowers, all three smiling, beneath a bright yellow sun labeled Our Family. He had once measured success in real estate square footage and profit margins. Now, it was the sound of laughter echoing from the back seat of his car, the way the girls clung to his legs when he arrived at their apartment, and the look in Emma's eyes that had shifted from wary to something almost resembling trust. For the first time in years, Richard felt rooted. Still, there was unfinished business. Beneath every shared cupcake and bedtime story, one truth remained untouched. He had missed Evan's final years entirely. The guilt didn't vanish with acts of kindness. It lingered, and it was time, he realized, to face it head on. The opportunity came in the form of an old wooden guitar. It had been sitting in a storage unit, Evan's, unopened since his passing. Emma had kept the key, but hadn't gone back. Too much, she'd whispered once. Too soon. So Richard went alone. The unit was small and musty, a time capsule of a life lived fully and gone too soon. Inside, amidst bins of baby clothes, a folded stroller, and stacks of songbooks, was the guitar case. Richard knelt beside it, palms trembling, and opened it. The guitar was aged but intact, the strings dusty, the wood nicked at the edges. Evan's initials were carved into the back in a boyish scrawl. Richard ran his fingers over the letters as if they could speak to him. He carried it back to his car, like it was something sacred. That evening, he arrived at Emma's apartment just before dinner. The girls rushed to greet him, arms thrown around his waist. Emma appeared in the hallway, drying her hands on a dish towel. "You're early," she said. "I found something," Richard said, stepping inside. He set the case on the table, unlatched it, and opened it to reveal the guitar. Emma froze. Her eyes dropped to the instrument, then back to Richard. "Is that—" "It was in his storage unit. I had it cleaned up. It still plays." She stepped forward slowly, kneeling beside the case. Her hands hovered above it, then finally settled on the worn neck of the guitar. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, no one spoke. "I haven't seen this since the hospital," she said quietly. He had it with him. Said he wanted to teach the girls when they got older. Richard nodded, emotion rising. "Maybe I could learn. Teach them, I mean, when the time's right." Emma looked up at him, something unspoken passing between them. Gratitude, maybe, or the ache of shared grief. Then she gave a short nod. The next Sunday, they took the girls to a park on the edge of the city, one with a wide grassy hill and cherry blossom trees that bloomed late in spring. It was Evan's favorite park when he was little. Richard remembered pushing him on the swings here, the way Evan used to lie in the grass and talk about stars, even in the middle of the day. Now, decades later, he spread a blanket beside Emma, while Lily and June chased each other through petals falling like confetti. The guitar sat in its case nearby, untouched for now, but present, waiting. After the girls tired themselves out, they returned to the blanket and sprawled across Richard's lap, both clutching juice boxes and cheeks flushed from running. "Did Daddy play music here?" June asked, twirling a blossom between her fingers. "He did," Richard answered, "and he danced. Badly." Emma laughed softly. "He made up songs about squirrels and sandwiches." Lily sat up. "Will you make us a song?" "I think we'd need help with that," Richard said, glancing at the guitar. Emma looked at it, then at him. "It's time." So they opened the case, and Richard placed the guitar gently across his knee. He strummed once, awkwardly, imperfectly. The sound was off, but the girls clapped anyway. "It doesn't have to be perfect," Emma whispered. "Just real." He nodded and began again. A few chords, a clumsy rhythm. But the girls sang anyway, making up words about butterflies and Grandpa's funny eyebrows. Emma joined in, her voice soft and familiar. And suddenly, they weren't just remembering Evan. They were honoring him. The music drifted across the park, carried on the breeze, and for a brief, perfect moment, time folded in on itself. Evan was there, not in body, but in spirit, in the notes, in the laughter, in the way the sun caught the blossoms as they danced through the air. Richard looked at the family gathered around him. One he never expected, one he never thought he deserved, and realized something profound. He hadn't come to fix the past. He had come to make something beautiful from it. Autumn arrived gently in Chicago, painting the trees gold and amber, as though the city had decided it too, was ready for something softer. Richard Langston found himself standing in front of a modest two-bedroom apartment just blocks from the lake, keys in hand. It wasn't the kind of property his firm usually managed. It was smaller, simpler, but this one wasn't about profit. It was about making space for a different kind of investment. He watched as Emma unlocked the door, then stepped inside with the girls, their excited footsteps echoing through the empty rooms. Lily's laughter rang out from the hallway as she discovered the bedroom with a view of the park. June ran circles through the kitchen, her socks sliding on the polished hardwood floor. Emma turned to him, arms crossed but smiling, her expression unsure. "I still don't understand why you did this." "It's not a gift," Richard said. "It's a lease, with rent based on your salary from the company. You earned that role, Emma. I saw an opportunity for stability, for peace." She didn't respond right away. She walked to the living room window and looked out at the trees shifting in the wind. "Connor would have liked it here." "He would have," Richard said quietly. "It feels honest." That night, after the movers brought over their few boxes of belongings, they sat on the floor eating Chinese takeout straight from the containers. June curled up in Emma's lap, half asleep, while Lily leaned against Richard, her head tucked under his arm. "Did you ever eat like this?" Lily asked, her voice muffled by lo mein. "No," Richard said, looking down at her. "Not until now." "Then you were missing out," she replied, matter-of-factly. Emma stifled a laugh, and Richard chuckled. But beneath the humor was something real, something whole. They were building a new normal, Slowly, yes, but surely. In the weeks that followed, the girls settled into their new routines. Their school was closer. Their apartment was warmer. They had beds with matching sheets and a kitchen with a working oven. More than anything, they had consistency. Grandpa showed up on Fridays with board games or coloring books, and sometimes on Sundays, he'd bring bagels and stay for breakfast. One Saturday, Richard arrived with an old photo album. "I thought they might want to know more about their father," he said, setting it gently on the coffee table. Emma hesitated. "I haven't even seen these. They've been in storage for years. I wasn't ready before." They sat together, flipping through pages. Evan as a child, grinning beside a sandcastle, posing with a baseball glove too big for his hand, holding up a third-grade science trophy like it was a Nobel Prize. Emma's breath caught when they reached a photo of teenage Evan with his first guitar, the same one now resting in a corner of the girls' room. Lily leaned over her mother's shoulder. "He looks like June." "He really does," Emma whispered. Richard didn't speak. He simply sat beside them, holding space for the memories and the ache they brought. That evening, as they put the girls to bed, Emma stood by the doorway of the shared bedroom, watching as June fell asleep with the photo album on her lap. "She's been asking more about him," Emma said. "She should," Richard replied. "I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to give her real answers." "You don't have to do it alone anymore." The words hung in the space between them. It had taken months to reach this point. Months of shared effort, forgiveness that hadn't been spoken aloud, but shown in gestures, presence, and time. "Are you staying long enough for tea?" Emma asked, tilting her head toward the kitchen. Richard smiled. "If you're offering." In the kitchen, over mugs of mint tea, Emma finally asked the question that had sat unspoken since the day he knocked on her door. "Why now? Why come back after all these years?" He looked down at his hands. "Because I saw their eyes. Evan's eyes. And I realized I'd already missed one life I should have been a part of. I wasn't going to miss two more." Emma nodded slowly, watching him with something softer than she had before. "I'll never be able to undo what I lost with Evan," Richard said. "But I can build something honest with them, with you, if you'll let me." Emma's voice was quiet. "You already are." That night, as he stepped out into the crisp air, Richard felt something shift in his chest. Not the coldness of grief, but the warmth of grace, of being allowed back into a story he thought had ended long ago. Not as a rescuer, not as a CEO, but simply as a man learning, for the first time in his life, what family truly meant. And that, he thought, as he looked back at the small apartment glowing softly through the windows, was the only legacy worth leaving. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early December when Richard found himself seated in the auditorium of Lily and June's elementary school, surrounded by parents with video cameras, phones raised in anticipation, and the sweet chaos of a holiday program about to begin. Children in handmade elf hats peeked out from behind the red velvet curtain. The air smelled of cinnamon and paper glue, and muffled Christmas carols played softly through the loudspeakers. Emma sat beside him, bundled in a thick scarf, her gloved hands clenched tightly in her lap. They didn't speak much, but the silence between them had become familiar, no longer heavy or hesitant. Instead, it was filled with the kind of shared understanding that didn't require words. Richard adjusted his coat and looked around. These spaces had once been foreign to him. He'd attended board meetings in luxury hotels and brokered billion-dollar deals in marble-clad conference rooms. But this? Rows of metal chairs on a linoleum floor? It was humbling. And strangely, it felt more real than any office he'd ever occupied. When the curtain lifted, a collective hush settled over the room. There they were, Lily and June, third row from the front, dressed in matching red sweaters with glittery snowflakes, each wearing an oversized Santa hat that drooped to one side. June spotted him first, grinning wide, her wave enthusiastic enough to knock her hat sideways. Lily followed, her gaze quieter, but no less radiant. Richard felt something shift deep in his chest. Pride, yes. But more than that, belonging. The program was exactly what it promised, charmingly imperfect. Kids forgot their lines. One little boy tripped over a fake reindeer. And when Lily's group sang their carol, June sang slightly off-key, loudly, unashamed. Richard smiled through all of it. Somewhere in the middle of a song about snowmen, Emma leaned over and whispered, "This would have made Evan cry." Richard's throat tightened. He would have loved every second. After the performance, in the bustling crowd of parents gathering their kids, Lily and June ran straight to Richard. "Did you see me wave?" June asked breathlessly. "I did. You nearly launched your hat into orbit." Lily tugged his sleeve. "We made something for you." They pulled a rolled-up piece of construction paper from Lily's backpack. When Richard opened it, he found a handmade certificate drawn in colored markers. "Best Grandpa of the Year, for showing up, singing silly songs, and never forgetting cookies." He looked at Emma, who shrugged with a soft smile. "They worked on it all weekend." Richard's voice caught in his throat. "I've never gotten anything like this." June beamed. "Now you have." That weekend, Richard took them all to a local holiday market by the lake, where twinkling lights draped every stall, and the scent of roasted chestnuts filled the air. They sipped hot cocoa and browsed handmade ornaments. June begged for the snowman one with a crooked nose, while Lily chose a glittering silver star. At one point, Emma wandered ahead with the girls, and Richard found himself alone near a wooden stall selling old books. He picked one up, an anthology of poetry. Inside, someone had written on the front page in faded ink, "For the ones we love too late, and the ones we choose to love now." He bought it without a second thought. Back at their apartment that evening, while the girls colored in the kitchen and the scent of cinnamon rolls filled the air, Richard handed the book to Emma. She opened it slowly, running her fingers over the words. "I don't know how to say thank you for this year," he said, "for letting me in, for not slamming the door when I deserved it." Emma looked at him, the book still in her hands. "You didn't just knock, Richard. You stayed. That's what matters." She glanced toward the girls, then back to him. "Connor always said love wasn't measured in words. It was measured in presence. You've been showing up. That's more than most ever do." He nodded, too full to speak. Later that night, as he helped the girls hang their new ornaments on a tiny artificial tree, Lily asked, "Grandpa, are you staying for Christmas?" He hesitated for a moment, then answered with certainty, "Yes, if you'll have me." June grinned. "You can even help make the pancakes. But Mommy says no raisins." "No raisins," he promised. When the girls were tucked into bed, Richard stepped out onto the small balcony, mug of tea warming his hands, city lights twinkling in the distance. Emma joined him quietly, her coat wrapped tight, shoulders slightly hunched from the cold. "They asked if we'd go to the lake house over New Year's," she said. "Of course," Richard replied. "It's theirs as much as mine now." Emma looked at him then, the soft glow of the apartment behind them. "So is this," she said quietly. And in that moment, Richard realized she wasn't just talking about a house. She was talking about a life, a place at the table, a seat in their story, and for the first time, he truly believed he belonged there. New Year's morning arrived cloaked in silence. The lake behind the house was frozen, still and silver beneath the soft gray sky, reflecting the hush of a world briefly paused. Inside the lake house, the air was filled with warmth, pancakes sizzling on the griddle, the crackle of the fireplace, and the giggles of two girls in matching pajamas as they unwrapped small gifts near the hearth. Richard stood at the kitchen counter, flipping pancakes with careful precision. His hair was a little messier these days, his sleeves more often rolled up. He glanced over his shoulder to see June balancing two snow globes on her knees, while Lily carefully lined up colored pencils for a thank you card she insisted on writing. Emma emerged from the hallway with a steaming cup of coffee, wrapped in a soft robe, her smile tired but real. She leaned against the doorframe, watching the morning unfold with something close to peace. A year ago, none of this seemed possible. A year ago, Richard had been a man alone at the top of a tower he built, unaware of the family he'd lost, the legacy he had ignored. Now he was grandpa, pancake chef, storybook reader, after-school pickup guy, and, perhaps most unexpectedly, friend. "Careful with the syrup," he warned, as June reached for the bottle with her elbow already knocking over a fork. Emma stepped in to assist, their hands brushing briefly. "Thanks for making breakfast," she said. "It's become tradition," he replied. "I even found a recipe Evan saved in one of his journals. Cinnamon vanilla pancakes. Said they were your favorite." Emma paused, blinking, then nodded. "He made them on our anniversary once. Burned half the batch, but insisted it was part of the recipe." They both laughed, soft and shared. After breakfast, they bundled up in coats and scarves, and the four of them ventured outside. The lake house backyard sloped gently toward the water's edge, where thin snow dusted the wooden dock. The girls ran ahead, leaving footprints behind them, their laughter echoing through the trees. Richard and Emma followed more slowly, watching them with a kind of quiet reverence. "They're doing okay," Emma said. "I wasn't sure how we'd get through this year. I thought we'd always be holding our breath." "You've given them more than I ever gave Evan," Richard said. "And you gave me the chance to try again." They reached the end of the dock, where the girls were tossing breadcrumbs onto the ice, imagining ducks and turtles below still waiting for spring. Richard looked out at the frozen lake, then down at his hands. "Do you think Evan would have forgiven me?" he asked. Emma didn't answer right away. She pulled her scarf tighter and followed his gaze. "I think he already had. He kept your business card, remember? He wrote songs about second chances. He hoped for one with you. That means something." Richard nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I've been writing letters," he admitted quietly. "To him, every week. I don't send them, of course, but I tell him what the girls did, how they're growing, how you're doing. It helps." Emma looked at him for a long moment. "Maybe you should keep them. Someday they might want to read them." He considered it, then smiled faintly. "Maybe." That evening, they gathered on the couch, wrapped in blankets, a pot of hot chocolate between them. Lily had one foot tucked under Richard's leg. June leaned against Emma's side. The fireplace glowed orange, and a soft snowfall began outside, catching the light like glitter. Emma reached behind her and brought out a small square box wrapped in blue paper. "This is from all of us," she said, handing it to Richard. He opened it slowly. Inside, was a leather-bound journal. On the first page, written in careful, looping letters, were the words, "To Grandpa, so you can keep writing your letters. Love, Lily and June." He didn't speak. He couldn't. He simply pulled them both into his arms and held them close. The weight of love and regret and hope all merging into something that felt like healing. Later, as he and Emma stood outside to see the girls off to bed, she turned to him. "You've become part of our story, Richard. Not the beginning, not even the middle, but the chapter we didn't know we needed." He looked at her, eyes stinging from more than the cold. "I won't miss another one," he said. And this time, she believed him. As midnight approached, the four of them stepped outside once more, watching as the sky above the lake erupted with distant fireworks, bursts of gold and green and violet scattering through the clouds. The girls squealed and clapped, their faces turned toward the sky, their laughter the only sound that mattered. Richard wrapped his arms around them both, and Emma leaned into his side, her hand resting on his. He didn't need to say a word. This wasn't redemption. This was something greater. This was love, found in the most unexpected place, a second chance not at fixing the past, but building a future together. In the quiet unfolding of Richard Langston's journey, we witness something truly rare. A man once hardened by power and pride slowly dismantling the walls he built around his heart. What began as a mission to confront an employee turned into a revelation that shook the very foundation of his life. Discovering that he had two granddaughters he never knew existed, and that they were the daughters of the son he had estranged years before, was a turning point that no amount of business success could have prepared him for. But what made Richard's story remarkable wasn't just the shock of that discovery. It was what he chose to do afterward. Faced with the ghosts of his past and the raw vulnerability of a grieving family, Richard didn't run. He stayed. He listened. He showed up again and again, even when it was uncomfortable, even when forgiveness hadn't yet arrived. In doing so, he began to heal wounds not only in others, but within himself. Over time, Emma, fiercely independent and deeply protective of her daughters, learned to let her guard down. Not because Richard demanded it, but because he earned it. Through late-night tea, storybooks read aloud, humble breakfasts, and shared memories of Evan, they built something unexpected and beautiful. June and Lily, too young to fully grasp the depth of the pain surrounding them, taught Richard the simplest but most profound lesson. Love isn't perfect. It's messy and patient. It's found in silly songs and bedtime stories, in handmade drawings, and in the courage to let someone back in. The story of Richard, Emma, and the girls reminds us that it's never too late to make things right. Not by undoing the past, but by choosing differently in the present. Second chances may not erase mistakes, but they can write new endings. So what's the takeaway? That redemption doesn't come with grand gestures. It comes with small, consistent acts of love. It's not about who you were, but who you choose to become. If you've hurt someone, reach out. If you're holding back forgiveness, consider what freedom it could bring. And if you think it's too late to start over, this story says otherwise. Now we'd love to hear from you. What part of this story touched you the most? Do you believe in second chances the way Richard was given one? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective might help someone else who's still on their healing journey. And if you found this story moving, inspiring, or just worth thinking about, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. so you never miss another emotional, heartfelt story like this one. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter. Until next time, remember, it's never too late to show up.